This is All India Radio. In the program Surkhiyon Mein, now we bring you an interview with Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, on safe livelihood and infrastructure work during COVID-19 pandemic. Interviewer is AIR correspondent Naseem Naqvi.
Welcome to the program, sir. Where is the economy heading in the backdrop of the second wave of corona pandemic? What impact it is going to have on our economy?
The second wave of the pandemic has, of course, taken us by a very unpleasant surprise, and it will also have some unpleasant impact on the economic activity because with the localized lockdowns, the economic activity has suffered, and also so has the consumer and investor sentiment also taken a beating. Therefore, the kind of recovery we were expecting in April and May of this year would be less pronounced. So otherwise, we were hoping to have a very sharp V-shaped recovery. But my own estimate is that all of this will be surely behind us by the end of June. And in the first quarter, that is April to June, we will still get a very positive growth rate, but not as high as we would have got without this. But by the end of June, we will be out of this, and our vaccination program would have taken strength and gone to another level, after which, therefore, I expect the economy to have a recovery stronger and faster than most people expect, and therefore we will end the year on a high and positive note.
How is it going to affect the rural economy? Will it have any bearing on agriculture produce?
I have to say that it's not, thankfully not yet devastating the rural sector. Yes, it's spread in more than 500 districts, but the infection and mortality rates are not that high, thankfully. And I'm convinced that the agriculture output of the coming Kharif season will not be affected, because once more the meteorological department has said that the monsoons are going to be normal, which is wonderful. It will be the fourth year in a row that will be so. And also the summer crops, which are going on now, the reports are that the area covered is quite substantial.
What steps Niti Aayog is taking to bring the economy back on the rails?
Well, I mean, the most important measures, steps that you can think are, of course, to ensure that our vaccination program, which is by far the largest in the world, is completed as soon as possible. And as you know, more than 180 million people have already been vaccinated once, and some of them twice. And our member, Dr. Vinod Paul, is leading this effort. And I'm very glad to say that under his and under the leadership of our Minister for Chemicals and Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Mandovia, we now have a very detailed plan of ramping up production of vaccine in the country, so that by the end of December, between August and December, we will produce more than 2 billion doses in this country. Dr. Paul has an estimate of 2.16 billion. And as that happens, we will ensure that all our population gets vaccinated. For that, we'll have to also hugely expand our vaccination centers, but that's also in progress. And the IT backbone for that, being provided by the National Health Authority, is in place, and therefore it will be done in a very organized manner. And that's the plan that Niti Aayog has to complete this vaccination drive. Along with that, of course, we have constantly taking the reform process forward, and we've done a lot in the last 1 year, which is very fundamental set of reforms, and those reforms will continue to try and accelerate economic growth.
There is an argument, sir, which some political parties are giving, that the funds allocated for infrastructure projects, which are on pause for the time being, Central Vista project in particular, should be diverted to health and social welfare sectors. What is your take on this?
I find this to be the most ill-conceived and pretty much mal-intentioned argument. Because unless people tell me that there is a shortage of funds for fighting the pandemic, or there is a shortage of funds in creating the health infrastructure, then to stop a project which will take 4,000 crore each year, so that's the total allocation is 23,000 crore over the next 6 years. I think it's very, it's just turning the facts on its head. And the government has ensured and that there will be no dearth of needed resources for fighting the pandemic. It has increased its health budget by 135% for the fiscal year 21-22. It has allocated 34,000 crore for the fighting the pandemic and vaccination. So why would you want to close projects which generate employment and economic activity and also regenerate and rejuvenate a decaying urban infrastructure? So I find this to be, as I said, very spurious, and I hope that people who are making this argument will think twice before extending it further, because unnecessarily politicizing this is not in the interest of either the country or its people at the moment.
What will be the impact on the psyche of people, especially children, because they haven't gone to schools for about a year and studied through online system, but no social interaction? How are we going to tackle this?
Well, we'll have to take steps for what is called catch-up education programs. And that alone, and those are now being considered in the Ministry of Education. I think and they've done a lot of work on putting a huge amount of curriculum on the digital sites, etc. But there is another aspect of it which is not very often discussed, and which is the sort of social and psychological impact on the children who have been cooped up in their houses and have had very limited social interaction for the last more than 420 days. Now that's something that we need to think about very carefully. That's something that we need to actually take on board. And I want to especially mention the impact on the female child, because that's even more deleterious than on the male child, because of our own social and cultural problems, if you like. And I hope that some of the civil society organizations will take this on board and will launch programs to mitigate this. Because it is very important that we do. And this is true actually more so in the urban areas than in the rural areas, where they at least have had some freedom, to still, go around and be with nature. In urban areas, in small tenements and houses, this has become a real issue. So I'm actually, Niti Aayog is actually working with civil society organizations in this regard, and we will continue to work even harder to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on our children, and especially the female child.
Coming back to the economy, the country has been aspiring and making tireless efforts for a 5 trillion economy. Given the losses caused by the coronavirus, especially the second wave, is the 5 trillion economy still achievable?
Well, we will achieve a 5 trillion economy maybe a year later than what the target was, but I'm quite sure that India will come out of this pandemic, and when it does, it will, as I said earlier, its economic recovery will surprise most people and the strength of it, and therefore I'm looking towards in India, which is on a path of high growth and achieves its objectives, its desirable and necessary objectives in the next 10 years.
Thank you, sir.
You were listening to an interview with Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, on safe livelihood and infrastructure work during COVID-19 pandemic. Interviewer was AIR correspondent Naseem Naqvi. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our website newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.